All right, so remember that manifesto was supposed to be launched today, but they have since postponed it. We'll be getting the details of just when it's going to be happening from our reporters. But we want to now have a conversation here in studio right now. Joining me right now is Kamodo Waiganjo. Thank you very much for joining us. He is a lawyer and a former commissioner with the CIC. Thank you for your time.
Asante.
All right, so before we get to the NASA manifesto, we want to just take a look at the Quad manifesto back in 2013. If we could just have the graphics here on our super wall, just what was it like and how different really is it from what NASA has been proposing they will do if they take over government come August 8th. So we just want to, all right, so I understand that the graphics are not yet ready, but Kamoda, we want to start from the conversation. A lot of things have been said and, you know, a lot of issues being raised. NASA saying that, you know, come August 8th, they're going to ensure that, you know, the secondary education is also free. First of all, before we get to the details of that, how can you comment about the campaigns that have been taking place across the country for both Jubilee and NASA?
Thanks, Betty. I think one of the challenges that we have had as a country is that conversations about politics historically have hardly tended to revolve around substantive issues. And what we have are, you know, basic campaign platforms, you know, and taglines, as opposed to fundamental policies that on which people can make a differentiation of leadership. And that is informed by several factors. One is that historically, if you look at how we have defined leadership and how people have aspired and gotten onto the political ticket, it has hardly been on the basis of fundamentally differentiated platforms. Most people have either grown up through the traditional political process, either because they belong to certain political families or are blessed by those families. And so we never then got to make a distinction purely because people pursued different platforms. And also, we do not have too many opportunities for us to understand the differences between different politicians, because if you look at all the persons who are seeking office today, the principal leaders in the two coalitions, you'll notice that they've all been in government at one time or the other. So it's very difficult for any of them to present a platform that's fundamentally different from that which they pursued. And so that's been a problem. But I think the other problem has also been that after 2002, when the clarion call was to remove Moi and Moism, the only other conversation after that was on the Constitution. Once we filed away the Constitution, it's very difficult now to get policy positions that are fundamentally different between the various political actors. So it's almost like the issues that people would present to Kenyans that differentiate them that are different are reducing. You know, you can no longer sell reform generally. Even if you sell something like free primary education, everybody accepts free primary, free secondary education. If you sell reforming the agricultural sector, everybody recognizes, you know, reforming. So I pity the politicians, because to craft a distinctive narrative is increasingly difficult. But so the issues are now going to move not so much to manifesto, but believability and capacity to deliver. So that believability now becomes the issue, as opposed to the promise.
And that's the thing, because, I mean, we've seen so many manifestos, like you're saying, from time immemorial. Everybody has their own manifesto. Do Kenyans really care about, you know, these promises anymore? Because you get into parliament or into government and nothing that you promised comes to pass.
I think Kenyans, I think it's a yes and no. I don't think that the reasons we vote in Kenya are informed very much by manifesto. Not in that traditional sense that we have understood platforms, you know, and so people vote left or right, because, you know, people generally, we vote very regionally. I'm trying not to say ethnically, but we vote very regionally. And so if you have a presidential candidate from a particular region, you will find that whatever policy that person espouses, the people will follow. And so we haven't had time to then ask, are what they are saying what the country needs? I don't believe myself that is going to be the story in the future. I think the Kenyan voter is increasingly become a little more sophisticated. Once we do away, particularly with in the next election, we will have done away with the Kenyattas and the Odingas, who have defined Kenya's politics for the last 50 years. The reality is if Raila Odinga wins the presidency, he said he's going to be a one-term president. If he doesn't win, I doubt that he's going to be on the platform. Uhuru Kenyatta is on his last term. So if he wins, then it means, that in 2022, the conversation will move away from the sort of almost cultic following that we've had around these two families. And I suspect that we can then really start to unpack issues and unpack platforms. For now, I doubt that is a conversation that is informing the voter, but I think any party that is thinking about the future must start to sound believable, must think through its programs, and offer programs also that make sense.
All right.
Part of the problem, Betty, is also that if you listen to a lot of these platforms, they have not been well thought through. Yeah.
The platform, the
platform. Even when you read the manifestos and you go to the proposals made in agriculture, and then you ask yourself whether there's really been thinking about all the complications as to why that which looks so obvious hasn't been done for 50 years. You look at, let me give you an example, the reform of the sugar sector. If you look at the sort of issues that are presented by the various political actors about what they'll do, you realize they have not considered the very fundamental challenges that will come about transforming that sector, which are both political, which are social, and are not economic. So it also means that even the persons writing these manifestos don't take the manifesto seriously.
Seriously. Yeah. Actually, for NASA, the manifesto is very close to the Okoa Kenya, if you remember, just maybe last year. Now, moving forward, you mentioned something very interesting. So this time around, what would inform the voter if it's not, the manifesto, if we remove the regional voting blocks, what else would inform the voter this time around?
Well, the bulk of voting is going to be regional. That's 80% of the vote is going to purely be regional. But there are certain areas where the voter turnout, as opposed to the voter spread. So that what you will have is in those areas that don't feel that they have invested, that have an investment in the high political office, then the question as to whether they then turn out, the question as to whether Western Kenya turns out in large volumes, the question of whether Upper Eastern turns out in large volumes, that is probably going to shift the elections. The question about, I have no doubt that in the core areas where the two presidential candidates come from, the turnout is going to be at 100%. So the question about how the other areas turn out is actually going to determine it. So the issue is not so much about the gray areas, the unknowns. It is not so much that they are undecided. They are undecided as to whether they'll come out and vote. And that is going to tilt the balance one way or the other.
All right. There are critics who are saying that given what happened during the nominations, that Kenyans seemingly, apart from voting ethnically, are looking for some kind of other different leadership. Are we likely to see, the big names like we saw during the nominations fall come August?
What will happen at the pattern of the vote is probably predictable at the presidential level. I suspect that is going to be very regional, and you can almost do the numbers and almost guess within a certain percentage point how the elections will go. But at the lower level, when we come to the elections for governors, when we come to the elections for members of parliament, particularly at the county level, I think people are going to be surprised. Several things were obvious during the nominations. Where people are allowed free and fair nominations, people actually chose on the basis of merit and on the basis of issues which people traditionally have assumed Kenyans cannot do. And that's why I'm saying that the Kenyan voter of the future is not the Kenyan voter we have known. Because once they have been freed from that loyalty to region and to tribe, they actually have the capacity to see difference, which is why you'll notice if you go to central Kenya, for example, you will find counties in which the incumbent governor won overwhelmingly. The neighboring county, the incumbent governor lost completely. That tells you the consideration was not incumbency. And if you compare the two candidates, you'll see that the one is known for delivery, the other one was known as a slacker. So the truth of the matter is Kenyans are getting increasingly sophisticated. But unfortunately, at the presidential level, one of the problems has been that we have also not inspired Kenyans to think. You see, we blame Kenyans for the way they vote around ethnic loyalty. But you ask yourself, why not? Because we also sometimes have not inspired them to see beyond that. For the reason that we talked about earlier, the fact that in terms of program and policy, these policies are not very different. If you look at the history of all these politicians, they are not outsiders. You know, most of them have been in government, so we know them. So there's nothing else that makes it fundamentally different that can make us then choose X as opposed to Y. And so we go to default, which is the one we know, whether it's tribe or region. And so one of the things that I think the elections of the future will do is that we will have compared Alfred Mutua and Mwangi Wairia and Cyprian Awiti and others, and the people who present themselves in 2020 and the elections that follow, we will be able to assess them on a little more than what we have assessed the current leaders.
Okay.
So there is hope.
All right.
But we have a long journey before we get there.
A long journey.
Yeah.
Okay, I want us to take a look at some of the promises that were made in 2013. Today, NASA was supposed to launch their manifesto, but they postponed it. And so that's really another focus I'd want us to take. So let's just look at our Super Bowl here and look at the 2013 manifesto, which Kamodo says that, they don't really, call for such a difference. Okay, so the key pillars, and like Kamoda, like you said, it's not so different from what we'd even expect from Jubilee. You have jobs, of course. Food security was another issue. National security, poverty, cost of living, a people-led government. That's what CORD was promising in 2013. Not very different from what we have today. Key pillars, others include social equality, infrastructure, and land quality, education, healthcare. One indivisible nation, I beg your pardon. So those are some of the other key pillars. So in regards to jobs, they had said that establish a 24-hour economy in major urban centers, restructure the Youth Empowerment Fund, and enhance the use of ICT. So I would like us to talk about this, first of all.
Yeah.
This is also something that was on the Jubilee Manifesto, this 24-hour economy, but still, up to now, it's not been easy because of issues to do with security. So what is it that this time round, because it's also again in the NASA manifesto this time round, what is going to be different? How come it's not been achieved before?
Then that's what I was saying, that these are good both in 2013 and the manifesto and we haven't seen it in full, but we have seen snippets of it. I mean, the truth of the matter is a lot of these are very progressive ideas, and I think no one doubts that. If you asked my 23-year-old economics student's daughter, she will write this for you, and she'll tell you this is what the country needs. I think the big question is the how. If you talk about establish a 24-hour economy, a 24-hour economy is not created by government. A 24-hour economy is actually demand-driven, and you don't actually tell people from tomorrow will now be operating on a 24-hour basis.
Right.
As you have seen, there are even entities in this country that started opening for 24 hours. After some time, they started closing because there are certain other factors about the dynamism of an economy, about the issues you mentioned about security, about what is it that 24-hour economy is going to do? One of the challenges we have in this country is about power, and one of the ways in which we save power is that we close the industries at night. So there are all these issues that are tied to a 24-hour economy that sometimes haven't been thought through. And that's why I'm saying that even the manifesto writers, what they do is they present what is appealing. They're more populist platforms as opposed to credible, believable options. And the challenge of that is that platforms that actually work and change are not very populist by nature. They tend to be very difficult to implement. They tend to be more long-term. They tend not to deliver immediately, and they tend to come at various political costs, so that it's not that easy to then present them. For example, one of the things that you need to do if you're going to develop an economy is tax people.
Okay.
Because our money that we are promising for for free secondary education, it will come from somewhere. That somewhere is you and I to be taxed more. Now, nobody wants to present that as their platform to say, actually, one of the ways in which we're going to deliver the following is that we need to increase the tax base. We need to ensure we are taxing anyone, even Juakali. We need to ensure that you are paying more on your pay, and you need to pay more on your VAT. Nobody wants to present that. But the reality is that if you're going to actually develop an economy, you'll have to look at both sides. There's a demand and supply. You can't just be supplying. That supply must be coming from somewhere. So That's why I'm saying a lot of these are very good principles. If you look at security, no one doubts we have a challenge in security. But remember that security is also tied to an unfunctioning economy. You also have to recognize that this insecurity is tied to the numbers of our police force, the motivation of our police force. You can't do that overnight. You can't suddenly tell the police, be motivated from tomorrow.
Right.
It will take even training. It will take time to
take
do
time.
some of these things.
Okay.
So there are good aspirations, and I think they are necessary. But I don't, and I have read sometimes the details of how they seek to be achieved, and you don't sense that there is sufficient thinking of the challenges that are there in achieving them, as opposed to just presenting them. And so part of the reason why governments then are not able to deliver is that once they get in government, as many have discovered, is that it's a very different ballgame to now deliver on that promise, however good it is. So it's not that good ideas don't exist. It is the how to.
The how to.
Yeah.
Interesting view there. One of the other things that is in the NASA manifesto right now, we've been able to see just, like you mentioned a bit of it, is the implementation of the TJRC report, something that Raila Odinga has been speaking about it widely. But everybody currently seems to be keeping off that. How easy is it going to be for this implementation to take place?
The truth of the matter is the reason we went to the TJRC was for a reason. It wasn't to have a report which we file away. So at some point, we need to come to terms with the fact that we need to implement it or decide as a country that, yes, we have accepted these are historical problems, but we're not going to do anything with them. If we do that, we're just postponing the time of reckoning. So at some point, we need to decide what to do with the TJRC report. Part of the problem, and that has the philosophical problem of the TJRC report, is that it's usually very difficult to have justice and reconciliation in the same sentence. The reason why some countries have chosen truth and reconciliation is because the minute you go the justice route, which means you're talking about legal sector, the legal sector changes, then the possibility that you create very many opponents to that process who then find a way to jimmy the process is very real. So at some point, we also need to make the point, what is it that we are most interested in as a country? What are the aspects of redressing historical problems that we must deal with? What are those that come as too high a political price and therefore may look very good on paper, but they are not capable of implementation? And that is a very pragmatic decision that we need to make. I think for as long as we keep promising Kenyans that we will totally resolve historical injustices, it is not possible. At some point, we draw a line and say we made mistakes as a country. Many of us are victims of those mistakes. You can't now ask those people to pay the price, but also there are certain consequences for those historical injustices that we need to redress. What are ways in which you can redress them? Is it greater investment in economic activity in particular areas? Is it more? So those are the questions we're asking. If we make it just a question of redress at that level, it can come at a heavy political price. And so therefore, the number of people therefore who want to oppose it and to put roadblocks on it are also increased. So it's not either or, but it's that we've got to have a very pragmatic conversation as a country. And whoever is going to lead that conversation, I don't know. Because if you look at the various political groupings now we have, you will find both victims and the people who have inherited historical injustices in the two political divides. So you don't have one side which is the victims and the other side is the villains. You actually have victims and villains spread across equitably. So it's very difficult to have any of them that will sit and say, let us now redress. And also the question is that you cannot redress fully. There are certain things that must be redressed. There are certain other things, unfortunately, we must say it's unfortunate, we made mistakes, we need to move on. And
is it going to make this TJRC implementation, is it going to be a plus for NASA in any way?
I think it will be. I think it will be in some areas. I think there are some people who believe, if you go to areas, particularly in the coast, in parts of Masai land, if you talk about that in northeastern province, if you look at those areas, you'll find that there are people who feel very deeply that they've been the victims of history. And so that rhymes very well in some of those areas. But I think a lot of people are in those areas are pragmatic enough to know that certain things are actually not dealable. So whereas they look as very good political platforms and whatever, they also know that the price that they may pay may actually destroy the economy of that area. So in a sense, it will help as a campaign platform, but it can also be very problematic. The other thing is that some of the talk, particularly when the talk about historical injustice, is defined as an ethnic issue. So that what we are saying is X are the villains and we need to deal with them. The counter effect of that is that those who you call victims then think, oops, then in that case we'd better come out to a man, to make sure we vote you. So in a sense, it's both whatever. I think the unfortunate thing is that we are having a very important conversation about the lives and welfare of Kenyans as a typical political conversation. I don't believe myself that people genuinely, and that's what I'm talking about, genuineness, whether people are genuinely committed to that platform. I don't think so. Because if that was true, for example, NASA has had a significant majority in parliament. Well, not a majority, but a significant number in parliament. You'd have expected that you'd have seen an overwhelming support for the report. When CORD and its allies believed in something in their last parliament, they even went to the streets. They fought for it. Even when they lost, we were all sure that they lost on principle. You didn't see that on TJRC. Why not? Because even within NASA, there are beneficiaries who don't mind it being filed away. So there's a lot of dishonesty in that conversation, and that's part of the challenge of a political conversation.
Interesting. Kamada, we'll continue the conversation shortly. There's also something to do with the gender bill, and someone would argue exactly the same thing you've just mentioned, that we did not see a lot of agitation from, their side. We'll continue that conversation shortly. For now, though, I want us to take a look at what's trending as we wind up our first hour